Okay, we will start the workshop. Boy, are you starting
Is
it,
that,
or I thought
is
you'd
that
be
code?
towing it? Okay, projected student enrollment, Mr. Lempe.
Sure, and I'll make just one quick introductory comment and then ask Mr. Widener to speak. But a part of what we wanted to do today is give you an opportunity to talk about the attendance zone in kind of the Inglewood area that is Lemon Bay, Venice High. But we thought that conversation might be best had in the context of both what your enrollment is doing today and projected to do and how that relates to capacities in our schools. So as a first step, Mr. Widener is going to talk just a little bit about what he's seeing in enrollment, not just this year, but kind of what he and the principals have agreed on for next year and sort of what that implies. So, Al?
Good morning, board members. Actually, this sort of does kick off our budget process because the whole foundation of your budget is our student enrollment. And actually, in December of this, December 15th, I had to give to the state our projected FTE growth that I went out and met with all the principals and reviewed past patterns and so forth. And anyway, make a long story short, I submitted a student FTE growth for next year of 500 students. That includes both charter and our own district students. So and I think you're all aware that our growth that we thought we were going to have this year was an FTE growth of roughly 900 students, and the FTE growth is closer to about 450. So what that is, and actually statewide, the enrollment that the state had projected was under what their projection was. So we do not have any proration of funds right now on the third calculation because the total number of students projected for funding in the state of Florida came under. And I have talked to some of our neighboring districts, and especially Charlotte, and they're in a declining enrollment situation. And for next year, they believe they'll stay the same. Manatee, of course, they seem to be continuing to grow. I think a lot of that is because they have more affordable housing than we do in Sarasota. So with that said, attached to Scott's read ahead is then the enrollment projections, and actually it goes back to 2013-14, and then we project through 2020, 2021. And on the first page is basically your elementary schools. And you can see in your elementary schools for 2015-16, and this is where we were as of October, because each column you see on this really reflects what the October count was, because I used the October count as my baseline, and that's basically because October is the month that we file our actual enrollment that goes up to the state for funding. So that's the rationale of using October. So in October of this year in your elementary schools, we had total enrollment of 15,614, and what we've projected for 2016-17 is a growth of 115 students to 15,729. The one thing, and I know we send out the monthly enrollments that you all receive from our office, and our kindergarten and first grades are less than what they were last year this time. So with us seeing the projected enrollments coming through at the entry level less, that's what's really generating not much growth in what's happening here in the elementary grades, because you still do have some growth that we had that are now going from second to third and third to fourth and so forth. So anyway, make a long story short, on your elementary schools, really not seeing much growth. The next page,
Just a minute.
sure,
Please.
yeah, and please ask me any questions as we go. I forgot to mention that.
We will, though. So the projection for a new elementary school next year, where does that stand?
Well, that,
I think, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think that's probably going to be pushed out because we right now are just not seeing the growth that was projected. Now, when that growth does start, that's anyone's call. I do know there's an awful lot of later on when I return it back over to Scott and Kathy, they'll go over in more detail what they're seeing in answer to your question there.
What I'm referring to is the consultant's report that we received that said that we were going to have this massive growth. And now we're seeing that that's not happening. And that's exactly what I was afraid of.
We continue to monitor the development, and as we talked about through that period, all of this is based on what actually comes out of the ground. We continue to drive around town, and the areas of hotspot continue to be being developed. They're just not coming out of the ground as quickly as we thought they may have. And that's something we'll talk about as we move forward. But I think, it's in a lot of ways good news for us because it gives us more time to plan for and budget for the development that ultimately, that it's not, for us, it's not a question of is it going to happen? It's just when it's going to happen. And that's why we're carefully and prudently monitoring the development. We continue to be proactive in working with our local government partners in the planning processes to understand when the development is actually happening.
Can we table questions for that when we get to that part, please?
Just let me finish the conversation, and then I'll stop. Now it made me forget what I was going to ask. I shouldn't do that.
You were talking about the consultant's
So
report.
therefore, we do not have to borrow any money.
Currently, and that's, as Al said, we started the budget discussions last month when we had a discussion of which, where are your priorities, where do they sit in the overall capital improvement priorities. Next month, we will bring forward the written part of the document that will further articulate what you explained to us at last month's meeting in terms of your priorities. And then we'll translate those into a capital improvement plan, which we are starting to work on right now. Every year that we don't have to build a school, it allows us to aggregate money, which allows us not to have to borrow. And that was certainly one of the scenarios that we discussed during the planning process is, the ability to aggregate money because right now our reserves for future schools is very low. So it's good news for us. It allows us to do better planning long term.
Okay.
Caroline, I just wanted to, if I could do one quick follow-up. I think in the 16-17 budget, when we start talking about capital, the one recommendation we will have is that we look to buy a school site in 2016 for future building and bank that site. But no, I don't see us borrowing money in 16-17, and I think it's just going to depend on where enrollment takes us.
Al?
Okay.
I'm sorry, just for clarification, you said we'll buy a school site, but that would be for elementary,
Yes,
correct?
ma'am, that'd be the intent.
Okay, going on to the middle schools. The middle schools overall, we're not seeing any what we believe to be a much growth in that area because actually the exiting fifth grade that's going to go into sixth grade is less than the current sixth grade. So with that said, the middle schools, I believe, will stay pretty much where they are. We will have to watch the charters. We do have one charter school that is expanding. They're building their final building, Sarasota Military Prep, because they had one additional building that they had planned on, and So they're going to go ahead and, I believe construction actually is beginning March. They plan, so with that said, right now our middle schools are currently at 5,845, and we all believe they're going to be pretty much the same within 6 students for next year. High schools, pretty much the same thing. They really do not see where they're going to be growing much at all. So in October, high schools were at 10,791. Our projections 10,786, just 5 left. Then other schools that you're mainly Laurel Nokomis, Pineview, and that's where I have the SE vouchers for private schools and Oak Park. We do see some growth. Laurel Nokomis has been growing in that area, so we do project them to grow some. And Pineview, we believe will grow some. So just a net of 56 additional growth in what we call other schools. Then the final page.
I have a question on this when you're talking about other schools. Currently, the corporate scholarship is at 440 or something like that million, projected to increase by 25% every year. So 2016 is going to go up to 500 million, add 25%, for 4 years, 4 years down the line. In 2020, it's going to be $1 billion. 2024, it's going to be $2 billion. 2028, $8 billion, and on and on. Can we get enrollments in private schools included in this and track those somehow? Because I think if we're seeing an increase in that, because if they're going to be doubling the amount of dollars that they have available to this program by significant, by 2036, they're going to be funded at the same level of public schools if this continues. So I think they will be going out and looking to build more private schools and looking to attract more students. And I would like to be able to track the growth in private school enrollment in Sarasota County.
Well, right now, there is no requirement that private schools do have. We can, ask them to voluntarily provide that information to us, but that is not in our database whatsoever, like St. Martha's and Out-of-Door Academy.
I think the DOE has, under their school choice, lists what schools are in each county. And I think they have an enrollment and how many get this. So they have that information. So perhaps you could get that from the DOE, school choice office.
Yeah,
I think that would be where you'd find it.
right.
Thank you.
No problem. Okay, going on to the last page. The charter schools, you can see, have projected a fairly large growth there. Currently, in October, we're at 6,345, and they are estimating they would go up basically 525 students. Now, with that said, however, the charters, because in their contract, it indicates that whatever is agreed upon in the enrollment process is what their cap is. So the charters normally go with what can their facility hold, not necessarily exactly what they believe their projection may come in at. So I know they will not grow that full 525. I would estimate they'll probably grow maybe 50% of that. Because some of our charter schools are actually at capacity where they really cannot take any additional students. Sarasota Arts and Sciences, they're one at their total capacity and have a waiting list. So you can see that they're staying the same number going across. Venice Leadership, that facility is about the same. They're at capacity. But the ones that have the ability to grow, when you look at the comparison between 2015-16 and 16-17, you can see that's where they do have their numbers going up with, like I mentioned before, Sarasota Military Prep going up probably one of the most because of having the new building there. And of course, the down in Inglewood, the Sky Academy, right now they only have 6th and 7th, and now they'll go to 8th grade. So they're projecting that they'll get up to in a few years at the capacity for their facility that's off of River Road. So so that gives, so bottom line, between our totals with charters, where we were in October was 42,784, and what we're projecting for 16-17 is 43,498. Increase is 714, of which roughly 190 of those students are actually in our district schools. The rest are in the charter. Now, with that said, you probably remember that I just said that I submitted a state FTE projection of around 500. And that's because I don't believe the charters will have that many students. And on the state FTE projection, every district is asked to try and be as accurate as possible so that the enrollment that the legislature is funding is not an inflated amount. And then, they would have, because we all know appropriations are limited that the state has, and we would like to ensure that what they do appropriate is really as close as we can to what the student enrollment will come in at. Just also to give you a little flavor for the state as a whole, on the third calculation, we were with about statewide about 2,000. Can't remember if it was 2,200 or 2,000. It's right in that neighborhood of what was below the state projection. So anyway, that's pretty close when you look at the total student population for the state. So with that said, I believe that. Now the other thing I did
Mr.
was,
Kovac has a question.
Sure. Before you leave that, these are your projections, right?
with principal's inputs and executive director input.
But
right.
there are numbers, not
Yes, there are numbers, correct.
because I want to follow up on what Caroline said earlier. I mean, we're talking in 5 years from now, according to your numbers, that's 1,600 more students, but 800 of those 1,600 students are for charter schools, or are expected to be in charter schools. So that's 800 net gain of 800 in 5 years. I don't think those are the numbers we were given by the consultant when they told us that the sky was falling and we had to hurry up and build a whole bunch of schools. So I just have to say I'm kind of, I question and I know other board members question the projections by our consultant, but these numbers, at least in my opinion, don't look like anything like the consultant gave us for that time frame. And I don't know if we want to say that these are optimistic numbers or pessimistic numbers, because we certainly missed this year as well, actually by quite a bit growth-wise. So I just, I'm not sure that I have a whole lot of faith in the numbers we got from our consultants at this point in time.
I guess if I could comment on that, if I think about the methodology that they used, there are two components of it that are really key to me. One is working with the local governments on what they're seeing with building permits. What is residential development really doing? And so that's what they did. They went to the municipal governments and said, and I'm not trying to defend their numbers because they are far off, but just so you understand how they got there. They worked with residential government, or municipal governments to say what's happening with residential development, and then they looked historically across Sarasota about how many kids typically come out of each one of those homes. I think part of what's happening is just a delay in residential construction. Two things. Number one, that the rooftops aren't coming out of the ground maybe as fast as we thought. And then second, who is buying those homes? And what that may lead to is us dropping, remember that thing they referred to as the student generation rate? That number may actually fall if we find out that the homes coming out of the ground are priced such that families with school-age children can't afford them. But that's generally the methodology they used. How much residential development, how many kids typically come out of a home, gives you a number.
But we made those same arguments when we were going through this consultant's report, because obviously if your average house in Sarasota that's being under new construction is $500,000, which is probably not too far off today, there aren't a whole lot of working folks with kids that are going to afford a $500,000 house. Now they may be, the folks with kids may be buying homes that they're less expensive, but they're not new houses, they're not paying impact fees, and we go back to the same argument we had
Right.
on impact fees. So
Right.
I agree with what you said, particularly your second point, that, these neighborhoods aren't gonna be for a lot of kids because the houses are just frankly too expensive.
Yeah, and the proof will show up in as we review our enrollments next year at the 5-day count and the following year after that. So.
One common theme I heard when I was out in November at the various schools was that the rentals were all going up quite a bit. And I know I actually responded and gave you a copy of that email. And so that was one thing that a number of the principals said they saw families were coming in and saying we have to leave because we just cannot afford to be in this neighborhood any longer. So
And I think that's really happened because we have had a number of families who are leaving and have left since the fall because their rental agreements, because they don't own a home, went skyrocketing, $300-400, as much as $500 on a rental unit in a month, and they have had to leave the area. And it's not as many, but it's similar to what we had or saw happening in 2007 and 2008. So that has to be taken into consideration, I think, too. And there just aren't rental units available in this area, unfortunately, for rental homes
right.
that are priced well. You're talking out Bee Ridge Road, the first development on the right, where there are lots of 3-2s that were bought up, by a lot of financial institutions, shall we say, and the rent on those have gone to $2,000 a month.
Right, and that's what I heard when I was out with the principals, is that, especially when I heard houses down in Northport were going over $2,000. That was a real shock. So anyway, with that said, moving forward, I then did some geographical things by area. So I did the North County District Schools, where that goes from University Parkway to Bay Vista.
Why Bay Vista? I mean, oftentimes they go north of Bee Ridge, or
Right.
is that a district
Well,
boundary?
I was looking at trying to get a North, Central, and South County breakout.
Okay.
And when I did it, it just seemed to be a natural. That's all.
Okay.
But that was done by OG, which is an old guy. That's me. So anyway, so I just did that on my own. So
Okay.
when I put this together. So anyway, what's interesting is I do have the data going back in the graph at the bottom, going back to 2000, and you can see in the North County we hit the high in 2006-07 at 8,821, and then you can see how it projects out basically. So I just did that just to try and give a little flavor. And by the way, this only is our district schools. This does not have charters. It does not have virtual. It does have John McKay. It just have our district schools. Then the following page is your central county district schools. And I guess what's interesting to me is that back in 04-05 is when we hit the peak for our central county district schools. And that was at 16,417. And now this current year we're at the 14,683. So a lot in the central district we do have a number of charter schools that did open during and expanded during this time. So that's part of the reason for the central county going the way it did. And then I have the South County geographical area, which includes Englewood, Laurel, Nokomis, Northport, and Venice. And that hit its peak in 07-08 also at 15,903. And we're currently in October this year at the 13,911. But we do believe that there will be some growth going on down there. For next year, we have growth of 105 students for the Englewood, Laurel Nokomis, and Northport and Venice. And then finally, a lot of times we get questions on just the Northport area. So I decided just to do the Northport schools. And so you can see how Northport, again, back in 2007-8, 9,222 students. And now we're currently at 7,805. And of course, Lamarck at one time was about 1,200 students, and now they're down to about close to 900 students. So you can see how what the Northport area has done. So with that said, and by the way, one thing I was going to mention, because the next page you have was put together, or no, this I'm sorry, I'm going ahead, but let me just one, because I know you're going to get further in the workshop on choice. And I've mentioned to you before how choice is really used to even out how students move between grade levels to try and keep it as equal as possible, so you don't have these blips going through. And when we look at the school's capacity and we see how many student seats they have available, we really use choice to even that out. And so that's one thing that with the student enrollment projection process, I do have to take into consideration the number of students that we've allowed to move from school to school and where they go. So just thought I'd mention that feature also. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Scott, unless you have any questions for me. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Al. And that's a great transition to, I think, what we wanted to talk about next. The next two sets of data that we included in your read ahead was kind of capacity and then a summary of where else our kids were going. And I guess the message that we hope you take away from this is that we have the tools. Caroline asked earlier, does that mean we're not going to have to borrow money to build another school? I think what this data shows is we have the tools available, at least for the next couple of years, to manage enrollment within the infrastructure that you have today. You see lots and lots of choice that parents are making, and Katrina Ward did a great job of including some real specifics in there. And then we included some stuff on both capacity and enrollment by school. And I really struggle with whether or not we ought to include this in your read ahead, because the numbers are a little bit misleading. And let me tell you what I mean by that. The capacity numbers talk about kind of the combination of how the school was designed and to some extent how we're using it today. But let me give you one example of how they can be misleading. If you look at Emma Booker's school today, you'll see that there's a capacity of 729 with an enrollment of projected enrollment next year of 571, so they're at 77% utilization. That would tell you that if there was development in the Emma area, which there's not, but if there was, we'd have the capacity to accommodate kids, right? But you don't. If you went to the school and you asked Dawn Clayton, how are you doing with room? Dawn will tell you she's full. And she's right. And part of the reason is, particularly at the Title I schools, what happens is Title I money you used to add teachers, now used to add support staff. Where do you house those support staff? And so what happens is, first of all, if you look at Emma, you'll see that their class sizes are relatively small. And so you'll walk into a classroom that was designed and is in Fish at 18 students per classroom, and the class size is 15 or 16. Every one of those adds up. Probably more significantly, though, is you have a classroom that you add some support staff. You need a place for those support staff to work from, so you ask one or two of them to share a classroom. Now you have a classroom that's designed for 22, shows up in Fish as 22, but the enrollment is 0. So the numbers are a little bit misleading in terms of the amount of capacity that's available in the schools. Having said that, though, I think the message in all this is we do have, between available capacity and choice and the other options available to parents, we do have the ability, at least in the near future, to manage projected enrollment.
What about, I mean, I still look at Wilkinson being at the lowest capacity. I mean, it's like, is there any way to turn that around, or is that also has something in it like Emma has where they've got smaller classrooms?
They also are Title I, so they do have some of that, smaller classrooms. But there are a number of students in the Wilkinson district that don't choose to go to Wilkinson for a variety of reasons. That's been a changing neighborhood as well. So I think there will be hired a new principal at Wilkinson. There's some conversation about what's the brand of Wilkinson in that community, and you want the leader to be on board in that discussion process. So I think there'll be some discussion in terms of how can we get some excitement around Wilkinson Elementary, and we see some possibilities. So I think it is something that we're prepared to address.
I also see 3 schools: Bayhaven, Flippy Shores, and Laurel Nokomis at overcapacity currently, and even the total capacity. Is there something that's going to help? Are we putting them on the roof?
I think they're probably each in a little bit different situation. I think Bayhaven, the capacity number is a function of massaging the new building. What does that new building really hold? Because Bayhaven, as you know, has a fixed enrollment, so they are managing their enrollment within the capacity they have today. So I think some of what you're seeing is just the accuracy of the data relative to that new facility and how we're using that new facility. Because if you remember, there are 6, I think, classrooms in the new cafeteria building.
But all 3 of those schools are pretty much, this is what they've got. There isn't much room for expansion
Right.
of those schools.
Right. Philippi is over capacity marginally, but as a result of 2 things, I guess. Number one is the way that Dr. Foster is using her space. For example, there's a room adjacent to her media center that she is now. It wasn't designed as a classroom space, but she's actually offering courses in there. So you have a space that has a capacity of 0, and there are 18 kids in there. Second, she's using co-teach models. So you see a place where the classroom is designed for 18 or 22, but there are 35 kids in the class. So those kinds of things allow her to exceed her capacity.
And Bayhaven has a number of students coming from out of county.
They do.
Do we know how many and
Off the
how
top of
that
my head,
impacts us?
Mickey
curious.
Ryan's sitting behind me. She may.
Why do we allow out-of-county students in and have a waiting list for in-county students?
The policy and procedures that have been for Bayhaven have kind of been historical, so I don't think they've changed. I think it's always been a sign up on a waiting list, but I'm not familiar with any change in terms of what it's historically been.
There's a waiting list for only in county, or is there a waiting list for full total?
It's not a waiting list for every grade level. They're typically the only place they might have a waiting list is like kindergarten.
Okay.
I
But to my question, it would that
I think
all
it's a
encompass-
single waiting list.
Okay, that's
Well, I would like to maybe look at that to make sure that when there's a waiting list that Sarasota County students get preference over out-of-county students.
You asked the question, how many are coming from outside the county? Mickey just handed me their kind of membership report. The enrollment on this membership report was 602. There are 129 students who we track as address not on map. That simply means it's not in our GIS. Typically, those are students coming from outside. There could be somebody in there with a bad address too, but typically there's somebody coming from outside the county. So 120.
120.
Yes, ma'am.
Part of it is what we find is I know that there are businesses, people that work in Sarasota County and prefer to access that because it's more convenient, just as we allow reassignments. You have USF, New College, a number of those faculty. They may not be living in Sarasota County, but they're working, and that's a convenient school, Ringling. So you've got kind of a large group of employees who choose to access our schools because it's close to where they work.
But Sarasota taxpayers pay for those students. Okay.
So the last thing we want to, and we're going to just start the dialogue, but it's really a conversation that we'd hope the board would have, but talk a little bit about the attendance zone that today we refer to as the Inglewood Inset, and that is the attendance zone that today is in Sarasota County, but is districted to Lemon Bay High School. And it's tough to get your hands on the numbers, but I gave you some of just the aggregate information in your read ahead. There are about 90 kids right now that live in that inset area that are attending Venice High School, and I gave you a scatter plot of those just so you could see. Lori and I talked about this some time ago, and both of us had this expectation that the closer you got to Manasota Beach Road or the north end of that attendance zone, the more rich the kids would be, rich in terms of number, kids choicing to Venice High, but that's not what you see. You see them kind of coming from all over that attendance zone. So we just wanted to start a dialogue with you. I know you've heard from some parents who have said, I live in Sarasota, pay Sarasota taxes, I want to go to a Sarasota school. Today they're districted to Lemon Bay, so we just kind of wanted to get your thoughts on where you want to head that conversation.
I heard that there were students turned away that I think lived in the South County area and wanted to go to Venice High and were turned away from Venice High this year.
And that's probably true, and I'll have Katrina nod this way or that way if I say this wrong. In at least one case, that was a parent who missed the choice window.
Oh, okay.
So
All
then they
right.
came in through reassignment, didn't have our reassignment. So, but there is the potential when I think we're talking about being open to choice next year for 25 students, there is the potential under today's rules that
Right. But we were looking at a modification in terms of the choice process to give the parents that live in this area a preference in the as part of the choice process. That still doesn't guarantee it, but it does give them a preference as a way to manage that growth because there is limited capacity at Venice High, but yet accommodate some of those concerns.
Jane?
I was approached by a school board member in Charlotte County who was concerned about having space at Lemon Bay High School for our students, and informally and perhaps figuratively or in a fun way asked if we'd be building on to Lemon Bay High School, which I gasped and said, I don't think so. But please no. But, I want every Sarasota County student to go to school in Sarasota County. That's just my preference, and I think those that are right down on the borderline in Inglewood, some of them really prefer Lemon Bay, but I've had a number of parents who have voiced concern about going to school in Sarasota County, and I think it becomes even more of a concern to parents when they see a differential in grades or pay for play for sports and things of that type, which are going on. There was a time when there was not a lot of difference between the two counties in school grades and other things, and now we do see some of that.
Well, and we've done analysis of that, knowing that that had been a discussion as well in terms of the ability to redistrict at this point. And I will tell you that right now you don't have the capacity at Venice High to accommodate everyone. So this would be my recommendation. I think we go another year and we continue to monitor with an adjustment in terms of our choice procedures relative to this area. Know that there is a wing in the capital plan that is planned eventually for Venice in terms of it's out there, but I think you have to manage this process, and I don't think opening up a redistricting conversation at this point is doable, or it doesn't make sense right now. It may in a few years if we find that we're have difficulty in managing growth around Venice as we kind of navigate through that. So I think let's tweak it and let's monitor it so we make good decisions.
Well, it would certainly be my hope that you'd wait a year before you got into any redistricting issues.
I agree with that.
But we'll have you chair the committee, though, Frank.
Can I chime in just quickly, though, on Venice High School? When you talk about Venice High School and there is a place for an additional wing of 400 student stations at Venice High School, but it is not in your current 5-year plan, and it isn't projected at this point. The staff drafts of the 5-year CIP moving forward do not put it into even the year 5 of our current 5-year CIP. And when you look at Venice High School, it is one of our challenge high schools. It is at capacity today. But again, like Scott said, when we were looking at our numbers elsewhere and why certain schools are higher or lower, because either they have additional capacity that can happen through portables that aren't being utilized, or or the way the school is being used. We do think that Venice High School has the ability to adapt, to increase its student enrollment using the student stations they have today through things like co-teaching or moving their teachers around. Right now, their teachers are dedicated to a classroom. That means that 7/8 of the, or 1/8 of the time, that classroom is not being utilized. So if you used a more of a mobile teacher model where teachers moved from class to class, you would be able to close that gap and utilize those classrooms in a better way. But there are ways to address the capacity needs. We could even look at using potential portables at Venice High School, although the place to put the portables would be the place that you would eventually put that wing. So what would you do there? But just understand that the current 5-year CIP and the one that you're going to see as a draft form, at least unless you tell us otherwise, does not include a wing for Venice High School.
Well, I think we're seeing some concern from some board members that we want to be able to accommodate some growth at Venice High. And I also want to say that when we do put it in our plan, that we notify Charlotte County so that they can plan also. And if there's any plans between now and then, let them know that that's not something we plan to do to build Lemon Bay, because it could have been tongue-in-cheek. I'm not sure what they meant by that. But sometimes we hear things.
It was not tongue-in-cheek, and I kind of fill in a blank there. We did meet with the Charlotte County staff it was actually kind of smart on their part, but when they designed and built Lemon Bay, they included in the facility an attic. And I put attic in quotes because it's essentially a second floor of one of their buildings that is laid out to expand when they need additional capacity. They can go up on that second floor, they can put in an air handler, some walls, and they have additional capacity. In terms of designing and building a school, it was a pretty ingenious way to do that because there's no student stations, it's an attic, but it can become student stations.
We can learn
really quickly.
something.
Oh, I think so. I mean, it was a really good idea. So they approached us really in the context of the development that's happening in far South County. And as West Villages in particular begins to expand down in the Inglewood area, if those kids continue to be districted to Lemon Bay High School, is the Sarasota County School Board interested in helping us invest in completing that attic? On the one hand, it's an awfully cheap way to get additional student stations. On the other hand, it's a long ways out from being in a place where West Villages in particular is starting at the north and moving south. So it's going to be a number of years before, even if you left districts the way they are, a number of years before
Well,
you need the space.
maybe we ought to look at attics too when we're expanding
Oh,
Venice.
it was a good idea.
Caroline?
How many students are currently attending Venice High School from the Englewood area?
About 90.
And that's choiced?
That's from the attendance zone that is Lemon Bay High School, but live in Sarasota. 92, I think, was the number.
Okay.
Choice or reassignment. Combination of choice and reassignment.
So adding 25 additional, what, we think that would be sufficient?
I don't know if it'll be sufficient because we can look at historically, you don't have everybody, choicing in a 90, choicing in every year. This is over a period of time. So I think it will accommodate those who want to achieve it, or it'll be close. I think we'll have to wait and see how many choose to make that decision. Those that do, if they are from that area, we would give them a preference in the choice process versus another area
Because I
outside.
believe that all of our students from Sarasota County who want to go to our schools should be able to go to our schools, and that's the bottom line.
Is that what this tab 4 is? Students in Lemon Bay attendance zone that attend Sarasota schools? Because
Yes.
I mean, I couldn't tell what exactly that was. There wasn't a total number on it. I didn't know where the county line was.
So the county line for Charlotte County is essentially the bottom of the page.
Okay.
And each place there's a little body represents a student who is districted to Lemon Bay High School, lives in Sarasota, and attends one of our schools, yes.
What are the dots?
Kids.
Do we
Oh,
have
It's
I
just
see
how they're-
bodies, and then I see dots.
It's just a matter of the way the map is putting them on there.
And that's 90?
92 was the exact
For,
number, yeah.
that are at Venice.
Right. No,
There
the
are-
total of those, about 60 are at Venice.
okay.
This
Only-
is total.
Oh, okay, so 92 is not just to Venice High, that
Correct.
was.
It includes like a dozen at
So it's
Pine
like
View. And
60.
Right.
And I guess my question would be, how many in Sarasota County attend Lemon Bay? Do we have that?
About
121.
120 at
121.
Lemon Bay High School, yes.
But if I go back to what Caroline was talking about and even what Shirley was talking about, I am not at all comfortable with particularly the situation at Bay Haven where a Manatee County student or whatever county it happens to be can take the place of a potential Sarasota County student. I mean, whether it's because, you know, it doesn't really matter why to me. If you've got Sarasota County taxpayers paying referendum dollars that go to schools, and they're obviously can go to school in Sarasota County, but they're being, for lack of a better word, bumped out of choice to a Sarasota school because of Manatee. or
I
Suffolk County
think
school.
that should be, I would like to see that not only in our magnet schools, our regular schools, but also in our charter schools, that, when they do the drawings, if there's more students applying for the school than are being accepted, I think they should have a drawing for Sarasota County students, and then if there's still more room, then open it up to other counties. And maybe perhaps at another workshop, we can discuss that further.
If
I had a
could-
friend who just came to me about Pineview, wanting her grandson to go to Pineview. And so they're looking at buying a house and moving to the county. They're not going to, but do we have a number of our students at Pineview
We-
or other schools?
Pineview is not available as a reassignment.
I didn't think it was.
So Pineview, you have to be Sarasota County student eligible for the program.
So probably the two most frequently used would be Bay Haven on one end of the county and Lemon Bay on the other, is my guess.
Well, could we perhaps ask you to get us those numbers of students from out of county, or what students from out of county attend where? In what county are they coming from?
I think you've gotten, wasn't that in the backup of,
No,
no, I guess
No.
not to our regular schools.
no. We just focused on Lemon Bay High School.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then maybe look at that choice policy or the policy when there's more.
One of the things I wanted to read you, because Lori had made a recommendation that we wait a year and in the interim give priority to the folks who live in Sarasota County. The folks in our choice office are kind of reading your minds, because right now the current procedure, which is new for this year, let me just read you a sentence out of there that I think is applicable. And this is in your read ahead. It's tab 6. I'm on the 5th page. It says, students residing in Sarasota County affected by the Student Exchange and Transportation Agreement. That's the one that allows us to transport each other's kids across the Charlotte County border. Between the School Board of Sarasota County and the Charlotte County School Board will be given a proximity preference. And the intent there is to say exactly what you're saying, is if you live in, if there are 25 slots and you have 50 that apply, that the spaces go to kids who live in Sarasota County first. Did I say that?
That's correct, with the, one exception is that because we try to keep siblings together,
Correct.
siblings would have first preference.
Yes.
And then proximity preference would fall after that.
Yes, sibling preference is the only other preference in the
So
process.
this is a proposed change.
It has been changed based on, the approval of the, district policy 5.20. We went ahead and made the guidelines, comply with our board.
Well, yeah, maybe she should be in the microphone. And
She didn't want to be on the microphone.
and if she's there, does this also apply to charter schools, or is this just the traditional public schools? Does this we've changed this to give preference to Sarasota County students in our assignment and reassignment, and that was a policy that's been changed and it's in effect right now.
It will be in effect,
Next
with,
year.
yes, 2016-17.
Great. And is this just for the traditional public schools, or is this also charter schools?
Right now it's just for our traditional schools. Charter schools, we abide by their contract.
I would maybe look at sending them a note.
I think we do that as we individually charter them. That's at the point we can do it. I don't think we can go back
Right.
and change our rules on the charter schools because they're already approved.
That is correct.
But you are in charge not only of charter schools, but also of the choice office, correct?
That is correct.
Well, you can let them know what we did.
all the good stuff.
Okay. Continue.
We're done if you are.
Wow. And that had nothing to do with the camera walking in the room.
Nope, it's great timing.
Well,
Any other questions?
We had one comment, and that was just regarding the portables. The portables, first of all, you should know that as you're requested, Ms. Brown, staff has conducted a thorough evaluation and is still conducting a thorough evaluation of all portables. We have looked at all the portables on campuses, and the portable capacity that's noted here is as it stands today. It could be adjusted based on the second phase of that study, which is looking at wood portables. So, for example, Gosio Elementary has 6 wood portables on its campus. It also has 6 vacant portables on the campus. They don't happen to be the wood ones. They're metal portables. So as we look at the condition of those wood portables and determining how we can utilize those portables, we will look at first the condition of our portables to determine whether or not, rather than having extra portables, we in fact are replacing existing on-site portables. But the discussion here, Taylor Ranch is an example. You see the capacity is pretty low when you include the portable component. That's because they have a number of vacant unutilized portables on their campus. In fact, they just started using one of their portables for classrooms this week. And so they have capacity, but the capacity isn't in their traditional classrooms. The capacity is in portable. So as we continue to look at this question, we're evaluating that portable question, looking at where is excess capacity available through portables, what's the condition of the wood portables, do we need to replace those wood portables, and if we do, how do we utilize the portables that we already have on their campuses?
Venice Middle has a lot of portables too. Is that for the construction that's going to be going on?
They have 18 portables on their campus today, and we are leaving them on their campus so that as we move forward with their reconstruction, we can use that as swing space. But there may be, and we're working this out right now with our architect and our to be appointed CM on the project, there may be extra portables on that campus that would be available for us. We just haven't decided, we haven't come up with a schedule yet for that project, so we won't know until the project is complete.
And I would ask you also to, next time you come up with one of these, and I found it very informative, the choice, the reassignment, and the homeschool, the John McKay, to also look at those, the private schools and how that enrollment is growing or not growing. Especially if we're getting, kids that are coming in and they're staying at $500 $1 million homes, maybe those kids are going to private schools. Maybe that's where the Oh no, they're not scholarships. No, that if kids are moving to the county but they're going to private schools, I mean, I think that would be informative too, because here the kids are, but they're just of a different class.
We could get a large number of students that are in private schools from the Catholic diocese, I think, because a lot are Catholic.
I have a quick question on the enrollment since we discussed it just as a follow-up. So since our enrollment, now we're pushing back the elementary school to a 2016-17 pre-planning. Am I correct on the time frame there?
Probably even after that. It kind of depends on what we see with the enrollment trends next year.
So from a projection or from a financial side, I know that, so now I know there was a variety of formulas that we'd be looking at based upon the discussion on the impact fee. Kind of talk me through the process of what we'd be just utilizing the impact fee money, not needing to borrow money. Is that kind of a recap of what I heard you guys say earlier?
Two things. Remember, impact fee money has to be used to respond to growth. So one legal use of that is to buy land. So I think in the near term, we'd be looking at first elementary school. If you figure, just to make the math easy, $100,000 an acre times 25 acres, so you have a $2.5 million site purchase. We would look to use impact fees first and foremost for that, bank the land, and then just kind of see what happens with enrollment.
And refresh my memory, what do we expect to get on an annual basis for the impact fees?
Gosh, Al actually gave me some estimates, and I don't remember them off the top of my head. Do you? It was like,
This year that we're in, we don't expect to get any money. No. Next year, I think.
Maybe you need to come to the microphone again. Thank you.
And I guess I'm going to have a large disclaimer because I really don't remember. You know, I had a 3-day weekend. But anyway, I believe for next year, based on prior history, I believe I put $1 million in for impact fees. Because you have to realize that the impact fees started, I think it was in 2002 or something like that, the original 2003, whatever. And what I did was I went back and looked at how we then started getting the impact fees. And a lot of times when impact fees are out there, builders will go ahead and get their permits pulled for everything they think they're going to do in the next couple of years. So you don't really see until you probably get in the third year or so a dollar amount. And like I said, I can't remember if I put in 1 million for 17, 18, or 2 million.
So really, for the next 5 years, we will not be seeing enough dollars in impact fees to totally pay for an elementary school.
Oh, no. In fact, we've never
We've
collected
never.
enough impact fees to build a school.
That was never a scenario that would work.
And also remember that, well, and you may not have been aware of this, but as part of the ordinance, there is a time lag. So December 14th is when our impact fees were re-established. But if you are you have a year to pull a certificate of occupancy according to the current ordinance. Now that could change when the county commissioners, I know this is one of their discussion points, is how much time that certificate of occupancy should be given. So even if you've pulled a building permit, there is still some time lag where you may or may not be actually paying an impact fee this year or next year, depending on when you're actually pulled your certificate of occupancy. So that also would reduce the amount of impact fee we would be getting at the early phases of this reinstatement.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, we stand adjourned for lunch and afternoon session.